Well, hello, and thank you for the class. I'd like to introduce you to Ms. Luna Medina-Wolf, who is a licensed mental health counselor in South Florida. She is the owner and proprietor of Moon Helping Counseling.
Helping Moon Counseling,
Helping Moon
yes.
Counseling. I knew I would get that back.
That's okay.
And I want to thank you for your time today. I don't want to take up a lot of time because I know you're busy. I do want the class to know that Luna has been working tirelessly with the survivors of the Parkland school shooting. And so she's been giving a great deal of her time to that. So just letting you know one of the things that you could do in terms of helping your community. So with that, as I told you, we were working on EMDR. We covered in this class, the class is trauma impacting counseling. And we've covered a great deal in terms of the various impacts of trauma, what happens with the individual from a neurological perspective, the social aspects. And now in the class, we're starting to get into more of the models of treatment. And so, of course, EMDR is something that a lot of folks are interested in. And I'm wondering, would you be willing to tell us a little bit about what EMDR is?
Sure. So EMDR stands, as you probably know, for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Big term. It does include a lot of training in between. So basically, I like to explain it to people in simple terms. We're going to work on desensitizing and reprocessing an event that happened to you. And with EMDR, there's a really broad definition to the word trauma. And we kind of define it between big T's, so the big traumas, natural disasters, terrorist attack, big accidents and such. And then we have the little T's that can even be, I had a fight with my best friend when I was 6 years old. And when that happened, it really impacted me. And I still remember that. And he developed a negative cognition about myself that became part of my basically schema. And this is how I continued leading my life for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Some people come to therapy at 60 or 70, not understanding why they feel this way. And the initial memory that triggered it could have been as early as those ages. So through EMDR, what we basically do is we help the individual desensitize what has happened and make it more adaptive in the brain. So when I was 6, because of my fight with my friend, I thought to myself, I'm not good enough, or I'm not safe, whatever it is that happened, then through the EMDR process, we take the memory. We can take away, of course, the memory, but we can take away the feelings associated to the memory. So then it becomes just a standalone memory without all the impact of the negative cognitions associated with it. And people are actually able to transform from feeling those feelings from back then, and through the process, normally there's chain of events. It's not like there's just going to be one event for most people. If it is something as part of a schema or a schema domain, and basically through the process, they're able to let go of those negative cognition and establish positive cognitions. We basically take away all the negative emotions associated to what happened. So instead of having an uncontrollable emotional response to something, it's more of a decision of, okay, this happened, I can be sad about it, but it's not this happened, so now I am sad, and there's no way out of it, which is what happens a lot of the time with trauma. People store non-adaptive ways of thinking, non-adaptive way of behaving. And because there's no processing to it, a lot of times because there's no support system or whatever it is that is in addition to the trauma, then they're not able to process it and desensitize it on their own. And then they have to get professional help. And I have to say, I'm very passionate about EMDR because what I've seen through my work as a therapist who did talk therapy and cognitive behavior therapy and different approaches to therapy, there's a component that is very healing. It's not just let me teach you how to cope with this, it's let me teach you how to get rid of this. So people who come in with prescribed medication for anxiety, many can get off of anxiety medication, depression, PTSD symptoms disappear. It's not that they go away and they come back. It's they disappear. So it's very powerful.
Very nice. So really changing that a whole way of attaching those cognitions and feelings and all of that with that trauma.
Exactly.
And so how specifically does it work? What is the magic behind it?
So basically, EMDR has 8 stages. The beginning stages is very much just like a regular session of the history collection to get to know the client a bit deeper and do some rapport building. Then the second stage is resource development, which is where you teach client to get grounded and teach them that they can do that on their own. So this way, if they leave session and they're feeling dysregulated, then they can do it on their own. They can regulate themselves until the process is done. Then the third process is when the actual reprocessing begins, and then there's a few stages within it. Initially, most people use the eye movement, which is basically moving the finger from right to left, having people follow the fingers from right to left. It causes bilateral stimulation in the brain, and through the bilateral stimulation, I like to explain it to people is basically we're opening a window between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. So we all know the subconscious mind holds about 90% of our cognitions, and we only know about 10 as far as the conscious mind. So they're together, but the communication is not something that is actively happening. Through the bilateral stimulation, we're opening this little door of communication between the two, and then we're able to process the information from what's in the subconscious versus what we're consciously aware of. So those are the next few stages, is basically identifying a picture that represents the worst thing about what happened to you. Then you're identifying a negative cognition, a positive cognition you want to work toward. You identify it's called the vogue, which is basically how true does the statement, the positive cognition, feels to you now. So how do you feel about it? Not what you know, because sometimes people say, I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I still do. So it's that dissonance between what you know and what you feel. And then you identify the level of disturbance. So the SUDS, which is subjective units of disturbance, from 0 to 10, how disturbing is this to you when you think about it, and where you feel it in your body. This is all part of the processing. And through the process, and really what's beautiful about it is the fact that it's very empowering, because the therapist really doesn't do a lot. We're actually not allowed to interfere in the process. It's all done on their own. You basically identify all those things, you start processing with that, and then we do a set of the bilateral stimulation, and then you tell them, okay, take a deep breath, tell me what happened. They tell you everything that happened, and then you say, okay, go with that. We basically say one of 4 things: go with that, notice that, concentrate on that, focus on that. There's variations to that. That's basically all you say. It's only if somebody gets stuck on a clearly irrational belief or cognition, then you may intervene with something that is called a cognitive interweave. This is when it's something that is not your opinion, that it sounds irrational, but this is clearly, black and white irrational belief, like an adult who is trying to process molestation from 3-year-old, and they're stuck on, I should have done something, I should have done something, I should have done something. So you may interfere and say something like, so I'm confused. Were you a really big, tall, strong 3-year-old? To just kind of like challenge the mind to say, wait a second, I couldn't do anything. But you don't say, oh, you couldn't do anything, you were only 3. You just kind of like challenge it. It's an interweave to help the brain gets to it on its own. And then through that, most of the time people get challenged and they're like, wait, I couldn't do anything, I wasn't big, I wasn't strong. And then they're able to process it and desensitize all those negative beliefs that they have to come to a better place. And then basically at the end, you just test it out and make sure you do like a future template, make sure that it's still holding. And then the following session, once somebody gets to a 0 level of disturbance and their belief about that statement is 7, which is the strongest, then you know that it's completed. Some memories can take 1 session, some memories can take 10 sessions. It really depends on the layers of the trauma. It depends on the severity of the trauma. It depends on how many memories are attached to that specific trauma, because like I said, there's chains. So if somebody just comes because they got bitten from a dog and they just want to process that fear of dogs, then it's most likely going to be an easy one. But if somebody comes in because they feel unsafe and they have like 25 different cases of where they felt that way, or 200 cases where you felt that way. It's going to take a little bit more time.
Wow, very nice. So there really is a great deal in terms of the neurological element that helps us to understand how it works, that opening the channel between the conscious and unconscious. And you mentioned three different kinds of techniques. One is the basic counseling, listening skills, just really listening to what the person is saying. There's a challenge element that if a person gets stuck, and then you mentioned the bilateral stimulation. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, so the bilateral stimulation initially, like I said, it's the um, eye movement through the hands. That's what Francine Shapiro initially created. Nowadays, there's people who use bilateral music. They use a light bar. I specifically use tappers, which is two pulsars that you hold in your hands and they vibrate from one side to another. Everybody uses it in a different way. I use bilateral stimulation even just for regulation. A lot of my clients who are anxious and find it hard, I teach them to tap, basically like to do this notion with your hands on your knees. You can do it with your feet. You can even do it with your fingers. If you're driving and you have road rage, you can do that. It helps a lot. Any type of bilateral stimulation can even be walking. That's why people say a lot of the time, let me just take a walk. Because once you walk, you're actually doing bilateral stimulation, swimming, kayaking, anything like that that creates that movement. That is very regulated, regulates the brain, and it helps you put things a little bit more organized. Sometimes people come in and they're so all over the place and it's hard for them to put their thoughts together. I may just say, okay, is it okay for me to give you the tappers? And I have them just put it under their thighs, basically, so they're not even conscious of it there. They just put it under, and then they start talking and talking, and then after about 20 minutes they're like, oh my God, this really, wow. They're like surprised that this really helped them be able to put their thoughts together and just talk straight. And to tell the truth, a lot of the time I tell people, I know what they're explaining in terms of how this helps us do what we do, but in all reality, I mean, we don't really know exactly what happens in the brain that helps us. We just know that the bilateral stimulation opens that channel in the brain between basically the amygdala to be able to report to the frontal cortex to say, okay, things are okay. It's not that because this happened, now you shouldn't feel safe. It's that happened and that was dangerous or that was sad, but it doesn't mean that now from now on you shouldn't be feeling safe. It's separating the non-adaptive from the adapted. Trauma is stored in a kind of like scattered way. It's so many different memories, pieces of the memory. If it's something related to what you smelled, if it's something related to what you heard. I mean, my trauma can be related to an Aquafina bottle if I saw it during my trauma. And you and I can sit in the same car during a car accident, and you can have different marks to the trauma that I did. Even so, we went through the same impact, same car, but we totally experienced it differently. So we're helping the brain to just put it all together, create a beginning, middle, and end, understand what happened, make it a rational chain of events that may create a certain emotion, but not create an uncontrollable, understandable reaction.
That's really helpful to think of it, how it can be almost an album of all these pictures and you're putting it together into one cohesive line of events. That really does help out. And I guess the last thing that I would ask is in reference to the required training.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't do this without having a significant amount of training.
So it has level 1 and 2 of EMDR, and some trainers do it in one bulk of like 5 days, 9 to 5. Some people do it in 2 weekends. Sorry, my computer is saying I'm low, but I think we can make it. Yeah. So basically what you have to do is you have to do both of the training, and then you have to complete 10 consultation hours that are part of the training. HAP, which is the humanitarian, can't remember exactly what it stands for, but they basically do training all over the country. Their training are really cheap, but they don't include the 10-hour of consultation. So you end up having to pay somebody, and they don't let consultant in training to do it. It's only their special consultants who went through certification of consultation. They're more expensive. So you end up spending all this money for consultation that you have to get in order to get trained. It's not even the certification process. And then other trainers offer it with the package. To tell the truth, from what I've seen, it's most likely better. People think they're saving, but they're actually not. They end up spending more. So if they get it from one of the trainers in their area that offer it with the hours of consultation, most likely they're going to that's going to be more efficient. And then the second stage is, if people want, they don't have to, but after the first 2 trainings, they can get trained in they can do the certification process, which is basically 20 hours of supervision, of getting consultation hours. I highly recommend that. I cannot compare for a second the therapist I was before certification and after certification. And I really got into certification by chance, because I'm just very much a person that likes to get to understand things better. So after a few sessions of very intense, complex trauma, I called my trainer. I was like, did I do this right? Is this okay? And I wanted to talk to somebody about the cases. And she, after 3 times of me doing that, she was like, come on, just do the certification process. You want to learn more, so might as well do it. And I did. And then there's so many additional training about dissociation and EMDR, about ego states in EMDR, phobias, first responders. There's so many basically additional higher level of training in EMDR that you can learn to become even more specialized in it. But everybody have to complete the 1 and 2. Don't think that you can read the book and become a practitioner in EMDR, because it's not as simple as it sounds in the book, and you may open a trauma to somebody, and our ethics is do no harm. So people don't understand that by opening a trauma, you can cause a lot of harm to somebody, even if it's not right there in your office. What can happen after they leave your office is very dangerous to people, especially with substance abuse issues or any other negative behaviors that people engage in. So I highly recommend getting the training and not do it at all if you're not trained in it, for sure.
Well, I thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I know it's valuable, and I think my students will really appreciate this too. So
it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really happy that there is this class that you're teaching. I think that every program should have a minimum of 1, if not 2 to 3 classes of trauma, because there's not a person in this world that is 21 years or older that has not had some kind of trauma. That's even younger, but that's like the threshold. If somebody's 21-year-old and they tell me they haven't experienced any trauma in their life, I know something deeply is wrong in there. So
absolutely. Well, I thank you
okay.
again, and
Thank
I
you.
look forward to talking with you later.
Yes, take care. Have a good Sunday. Bye.